back to Trending in Education. Dan Strafford, Brandon Jones, Michael Palmer along with you. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the importance of math and learning math throughout your life. Brandon, good to have you back. Good to have you in your seat. How you doing today?
Yeah, thanks. I had a brief hiatus. I was at work, to be clear, for those of you who, the listeners who are tracking my calendar. I was here, but just not able to be present for last week's show. Sorry to have missed it. I'm happy to be back, and we're heading almost into 2019, which is exciting. That's a big number. Talking math, that's the biggest number we will have ever lived through.
I believe it may be prime.
I think it.
I don't know. Let's add them up. No. It's divisible by 3. See?
Oh, there you go.
See, math is fun.
Math is fun.
Yeah.
The only problem I know is Optimus. But Mike, what do you have going on in your world? What's new? And excited to talk some math today.
I see math everywhere, and I see I get a lot of value from a mathematical perspective on life, and I'm excited to kind of explore those ideas with you guys.
I think it's often a conversation for students, younger students, that math can be a tough subject or a subject they don't want to dive into. For adults, continual learning can be difficult on the math front. People have math phobia or just lack of growth mindset when it comes to math. Why do you think this is an important topic for us to dive into today? And what are some of sort of the high-level takeaways you had from some of the articles that we shared?
Yeah, for me, I'm trying to read 20 books this year, and I did do it. So I'm on my 21st book. Yeah. So I hit my goal for the year, which is great. But one of the books that I just read recently was called Thinking in Bets, which was by a poker professional, Annie Duke, who's now more of a business consultant. And she actually, she had worked on I think she got her doctorate, or she was close to getting her doctorate in cognitive psychology, after graduating as an undergrad. So I thought that was a really interesting book, and it was about how decision making is very probabilistic, and how you have to think about the percent chances of different things happening as you make decisions, and how decisions are actually bets in a lot of ways. And that got me thinking. It's a fantastic book. I definitely would recommend it. Love to play poker too, which, if we could talk about poker or do a poker show in the future, I'd love to do that. But there's a real quantitative angle to that, where like when you start thinking probabilistically about your life and about decision making, you sort of turning things into percentages, and then saying, what's the likelihood of this happening versus that happening? And, that's when you start thinking about contingency planning. And I thought that was extremely relevant. And then started digging around into some of these other articles about the importance of math instruction. And in particular, and Brandon and I have known each other for many moons. And we've talked about this quite a bit, I think, over the years, is that math is extremely relevant. And then it's frequently not positioned that way. And I actually think that's a problem. So I thought it'd be an interesting topic for us to dig into.
Yeah, I think that's a trope that exists where kids say, "Well, when am I going to use this math?" Right. And it's like that's such a thing that either kids have said or say, or apocryphally have done so. That's it's a thing that exists in pop culture. Representations of math class being hard or irrelevant or boring. Right. So I do think, I think if we can, my guess is that our listeners over-index towards liking math.
Probably.
That'd be my guess. But if there are listeners who don't like math, and especially people who think they're not good at math.
Yes.
Or don't, for whatever reason, see math as being relevant. We may even have a fellow podcaster who thinks that he or she, I think in this case, maybe he thinks he's not good at math. But hopefully that a little bit of this message is for them.
Yep.
I just one other note on that. Mike and I, we both have Kaplan teaching experience and lots of it. One of the things that I found as an instructor was people who believe they are bad at math typically had one bad math teacher early in life who either, told, in many cases, told them that they were bad at math.
Yep.
or made them feel like they were, rather than, seeing that, every child has holes in his knowledge, and, rather than calling out the holes, calling out the cheese, as it were.
Yes.
And I think that it's really interesting how impactful those one bad math teachers can be. And so my experience in teaching adults who are trying to reapply things that they had forgotten was I had to get them, in many cases, over the hump of believing that they could be good at it. So, I think that's an interesting thing for folks out there too. If you are one of those people, or if you know someone, you can be good at math.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you could be better at math too. So that's another way to think about it, where like, I think sometimes people, in addition to the teacher causing the anxiety, I think being compared to others can also cause that anxiety too, where like, we're in such a competitive culture, and, academically people get very competitive, even at an early age. There's math tests from the time you're, 5, 6, right on really throughout your life. And frequently you're compared to others. So like, it reminds me of when we talked about growth versus proficiency, where everyone should aspire to continue to develop their mathematical understanding, because it is relevant, is the way I think about it. And rather than try to hit some minimum standard or think about how you can get closer to, the quote unquote smartest kid in the room, it's much better, I think, if you develop more of an introspective growth mindset for your own mathematical understanding. And I think that's where good educators, good math teachers, I think, do that, where they sort of connect to each individual where she is, and they say, what you need right now is to focus on this. And I love where you were going there too, Brandon, because I think part of what you might want to do is really address more of the self-confidence, or like the non-cognitive aspect of their math learning first, just to kind of fill those holes, so that they actually believe they can learn. And then once they believe it, it's a lot easier to teach them. But a lot of people have resistance that they kind of build in. So, Dan, you
I guess the jig is up. I have to. Well, to be fair, I like math. I play a lot of fantasy sports, daily fantasy sports. So math is intricate into that. Talk about probable outcomes. That is a lot of what daily fantasy and fantasy is projecting probable and possible outcomes and the probability of it happening more times over not. So I enjoy math and I enjoy applying it. But to Brandon's point, I had a bad math teacher in 5th grade. Like, I had and confused me and explained things in a way I didn't get. And when I asked for help, I was told I needed to sit down and listen, like that I wasn't listening well enough. And so it just became that back in the mind that I was an English guy. I was a history guy. I wasn't going to be a math person. So that definitely took a shape of how I approach math. In college, I took statistics, and I loved it because of sports, because of my connection to the numbers meaning something, to both of what you're saying, that I think the best teachers are connecting what's being taught to real life in every subject. And I think there are not great teachers who may not do that, who say you need to know, 2x plus 2y, whatever that is, and that's it, and we're moving on. But I do appreciate now getting back to math and understanding how it can help and what it can do. And I'm lucky, both my daughters love it. Both the daughters who are in school love it, and I've tried to not pass on my distaste for it in elementary school to them. But as we talk through it, Brandon, there's tons of applications, obviously, for math. It's every day. You're doing it without even thinking about it. You've already sort of talked about, talking to the student about why they think they can't and filling that hole first and then building up from there. But as we talk through so many real life examples, is that just what's missing, maybe, that there are teachers who don't connect those dots, and thus it's harder for a younger student in this case, to understand why should I care? Why should I care what algebra says or geometry or any of those things?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think that great teachers, and maybe what it is that one's average teacher probably needs to make it hook more into what your real life is going to be. But great teachers, I think, can inspire it just by making it fun, even if it's not saying, well, you're going to need to balance a checkbook. Do people do that? Oh man, this is like the jig really is up. I definitely don't do that. But you're going to need to proverbially balance your proverbial checkbook.
Yeah.
You need to manage your finances. You're going to have, basically in every profession is going to require some mathematical quantitative competency.
Yes.
And certainly in 2018, 2019. So I think the best teachers just make the learning part really fun. Irrespective of real world application.
Yeah.
But I think that if you're not a great teacher, because right now, like you're a bad fifth grade teacher is analogous to me, like talking to teachers out there. If you're a bad teacher, maybe try connecting it more to real life. Because I do think that is, I use the phrase hooks a lot, even this is the second time in this conversation, but we all have those. Like we all have a real life, right?
Yep.
And so that's a good tether for any of the more esoteric subjects that you're taking to get kids to care about it, showing them how it matters. I think that's neither necessary nor sufficient, maybe. But I don't think it's a bad thing to do.
Yeah, because I think what you're talking about a little bit there is motivation too, right? So like a good teacher, I think, naturally motivates her class through whatever techniques make sense to, because sometimes you're going to need to learn stuff that may not seem relevant right now, but you just have to trust that there's some value in what you're learning, and then there's some value in applying your mind to solve complex problems in ways that maybe you haven't solved them before. So like the idea that you can develop your cognitive ability, and then you have to trust a teacher to say, you can do it, and then actually give you the opportunity to learn. I think that's universally just good teaching. And then I think for math, because there are skeptics out there, I think it's important to be able to like manage your class or your dynamics so that when the smart kid leaning back, blowing spitballs around the room in the back says, wait a second, teach, because they always call you teach.
Yeah.
Wait a second, teach. Why is this relevant? You want to be able to at least, manage that conversation.
I know our K-12 classrooms haven't changed that much since the 50s, but it sounds like you literally went to school in the 1950s. You look great.
I do. I'm holding up pretty well. Thank you. But I do think that, I remember even when we were talking about language acquisition, the idea that, thinking of it as a skill and thinking about language acquisition as something that will make you more effective in your life. I think that's really interesting when it comes to math. And a related point, I think, is the concept of numeracy as a corollary to literacy, where obviously everyone is saying, well, people need to learn how to read. And
Sure.
if you're measured based on your ability to understand the written word, but I think increasingly what's becoming more relevant, particularly if you're trying to advance in your professional life, is the idea of numeracy, which is number sense is another way in which people talk about it, which may not be a specific, it's not like knowing how to find the second derivative or knowing how to do linear algebra, but it's more just having a sense of confidence when numbers are displayed and understanding that you can sort of accept and or challenge the reasoning that's going behind sort of a quantitative argument. That, to me, is extremely fundamental
For sure.
These days, and relevant really to just about anybody who's trying to manage their finances, whether they balance their checkbook or not.
Is that something that I got to hold on? I'm not done with this point. Is that something that people do?
Well, I don't balance my checkbook. Like I don't actually sit there with the ledger in the checkbook still.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Specifically that. No, I do not do that. I do keep.
Why so serious, Heath Ledger? I feel like it's nobody does it. Nobody writes checks.
It was a fair.
I wrote a check yesterday.
Yeah.
Okay, Dan.
Yeah.
All right, but so you don't do that. But what is it that you do?
I have an Excel spreadsheet. So I have a budget that I do keep track of, putting in purchases and deposits into our account and make sure that we're projecting a budget that we're not going to be negative at any point.
That's different.
Yeah. Budgeting is different.
It's for a checking account. So it's just.
For sure. Yeah.
It's so fancy.
But it is math. But what's interesting about math, even within the last 20, 30 years, is that the ability to externalize your computational skills has changed, where now, like, that number sense, I think people's ability to just compute, multiplication or just general percentages based on numbers that are presented in a spreadsheet, frequently people have to then run the calculation in the spreadsheet to actually figure out what the output is. Whereas, maybe 20, 30 years ago, many folks were expected to just bring that way of understanding numbers to bear. And I think that is a challenge in these days, that many folks are growing up really without the basic, computational ability, and almost become overly dependent on technology and externalizing sort of some of those skills. I think that is interesting, and like that's more a question for math educators and curriculum writers. How do you teach people the right fundamentals so that when they sort of advance in their lives, they're able to both engage with those external capabilities, like getting really good at your calculator, but also being able to sort of in the post-apocalyptic hellscape that is coming, to be able to still
when those kids don't learn their math,
figure out how many cans of beans you have in the bunker, for example. So like without
bleak.
Yeah, okay, so we'll get lighter, but anyway, I was going somewhere vaguely interesting.
Well,
I cede my time.
I think it is, and I was going to ask either of you this follow-up question: is the student in college now, or even a former coworker of mine said, "Why do I need to know addition or subtraction when I can plug it into Google and get an answer? Isn't it more important for me to know how to use the technology to get the answer rather than get the answer myself?" So, Brandon, do you have an opinion there on how do we separate those two things out? Like, the technology is getting better, and it's meant to make our lives easier. Does that mean math is less important because the computer can do it for me?
Yeah, I'm of a mixed opinion on this. I think it's important to have a certain degree of confidence and competence in unaided computation, so that if you're, just as an example, calculating the household income in the U.S. and you misapply a factor or a multiple, or you don't carry a 1,
mm-hmm.
and you get that the average is $100 million or negative $500, you have a sense that something went wrong in your. I can't believe people are just going to Google to do addition and subtraction. That's amazing. But so that you don't believe your Google /TI-83 /Excel spreadsheet when it produces numbers that are definitely wrong. And I think that, so to me, that's the as someone who, one, really likes math, two, I think I am computationally strong.
Mm-hmm.
All those computational exercises I do.
Oh my God.
That's a place where I find where people don't see obvious mistakes in their work, and then are so confident in the tools that they have in front of them, that they are, building assumptions based off of faulty formulae,
all those.
Yeah. So, that's where I do think that there is real relevance, is being able to, I'm making air quotes here, but check your own work.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I don't think that we should diminish the role of technology, whether it's any of those that I've already named, in making people more computationally competent.
Sure.
One of the things I do a lot of my work, even like my sort of scratch work, just in Excel.
Yep.
Because it's a little rectilinear. I like that.
Yeah.
It's like there's cells, and I can cordon off certain stuff from other certain stuff. But it has a really robust, and I only use a tiny, wafer thin fraction of the computational ability of a tool like Excel. But I think it's really handy, and
sure.
I find myself using it again all the time, even for things that aren't just building models, et cetera.
Right.
So I think we should celebrate that. And actually, a way, I think, to help some people get over that hump is to show them that there are math aids, that there are tools out there that will help them make it easier. That's not a panacea. It's not to say if you can't do basic arithmetic without having to go to Google is fine.
Right.
You know, who knows when you're going to be counting cans of beans? But I do think that we should celebrate, not denigrate the presence of those tools.
Yeah, I agree, and I also think it's important in a world where increasingly truth is in question. Being able to understand when math is being properly used and when math is being used to sort of fake it, you know, make things seem more scientific or seem more truthy than they actually are. And also having faulty mathematical reasoning, which frequently, like our natural instincts around numbers and numeracy may mislead us at times. So I do think there are places where math becomes increasingly relevant, where people are using, you know, sort of math-like arguments to appear more factual or more informative or more credible, and then to have some ability to kind of check that thinking quantitatively, I think is really important. And I think a lot of that comes from building not just the fundamentals, like the computational side, but then also starting to understand more critical thinking as it relates to sort of quantitative problems. Because increasingly, I think people are trying to make things quantitative so that they seem more true. And I think that's both good if you can develop those skills. Data science is a huge industry that, you know, data visualization, all these types of things. But I think there's some real value in being able to look critically at someone, like checking someone else's work or checking someone else's inference is something that I think only comes with a lot of experience and then some confidence in your own quantitative chops. I think that is really essential, particularly for folks who are trying to, you know, advance in their careers, and also just have a relatively clear take on what's actually going on in the world around us.
Yeah, I think the critical thinking part is really important. As a maybe too long and not interesting interlude, Dan, you can clean this up in post, but one of my college friends and then post-college roommates, who is probably the smartest person I know, and incredibly quantitative as well, worked for Goldman, later Big Law also. When we were living together, like post-college flat, had made, like, invited his then girlfriend over and like made her a chicken dish, but instead of using like the right amount of the crushed or of the fresh, I think it was rosemary. Yeah, use like dried crushed rosemary. Oh. And man, it was like Rosemary's Baby in there. It was so bad. So like that guy, like one of the things that an article I think we'll link to is talking about how, you know, math skills can help you in the kitchen, but critical thinking skills, I think critical thinking even over math in many cases, because the math was good, the input there was not so great. Yeah. So it's a combination of all the things, I think, that makes one good in the whatever room.
And I think that does come back, lovely interlude, by the way.
Thank you.
But I think that does bring me back to full circle to decision making and being probabilistic, where you're saying like, okay, the recipe said this ingredient,
but it seems like there's a lot
that's kind of in the general neighborhood of this other ingredient. Let me go ahead and make that, where in his mind, he could have said, there's a 78% chance that this dinner is going to be nasty.
Yeah.
I should not add that much rosemary to my chicken.
Yeah.
But clearly his probabilities weren't there. And even as a quantitative savant, he wasn't necessarily understanding how to apply his numeracy to that real life problem.
Yeah.
And that does tie back to the relevance thing too, where, like, you know, I think critical thinking in a lot of ways is trying to understand, what tools should I use to solve a problem? Do I need to use my own cognitive ability, or do I want to use an externalization of it that maybe is better than me? But it's all like sort of a combination of this good decision making and then good number sense, I think is fundamental. I also think it was interesting, the one article, 10 Reasons Why Math is Important in Life.
Yeah.
I did like, because you're going to come across as cool because you know how to split up a check, and you know how to how to apply a tip to a check. When you're out in a group, the person who tells everyone else how much they owe, is that person like amazingly cool? I mean,
no, the cool kid is the kid that picks up the check.
That's true,
right? Because then you're like,
why split it?
Yeah, check out like my bankroll.
I already handled it.
It's on swole.
You guys don't have to worry.
Right.
Yes.
That's the cool kid.
Yes.
The other cool kid is the kid who has enough friends who pick up checks that just freeloads off of them.
Yes.
Like in a way, like I think the person who's like getting out, like there is saying, oh, well, this is, you all like, let's,
they have a little green
Did
visor.
you get the one with the 63 cents or the 64 cents? I feel like that's okay. I mean,
it's not uncool. Maybe it's a little uncool.
It's only okay. So I liked this article. I think we're going to link to it.
Yeah.
It is like the author, the source of this is piday.org.
For sure.
Piday.org as the determinant of cool.
Yes.
I'm not sure that's a typical outcome from piday.org.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think it is good for you. You can be cool.
Yeah. And
there's geek chic, right?
Geek
like
chic.
that's a real thing.
I was just wondering if piday.org has its own fashion line, for example, like dress like a savant.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's geek chic, right?
I think, yeah. And that's basically like whatever clothes that you had several years ago that you shouldn't be wearing now.
And there's probably circles, right? So circles are always cool. Yeah.
One of the other things in this article, Mike, which I thought was an intriguing one and one we talked about before recording, was about math's influence on the brain. We talked about the 10% brain myth a couple of weeks back. We've talked about the brain and sort of cognitive ways we deal with things many times over on the show. One article basically says we don't really know how math as a whole influences the brain, but one in the Pi Day article at the top was about a study about recall. And that math does help with recalling to certain regions of the brain. One, about that specifically. And two, do you think it's just that math is so, disparate's the wrong word, but so vast in the way your brain encounters it that saying, quote unquote, math does this to your brain is probably too broad a subject, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think so. I mean, there are aspects of math that are closer to language, for example, word problems, et cetera. There are aspects of math that are more abstract and spatial, like geometry or even elements of calculus, where it's kind of a whole brain phenomenon. It's not so much that math happens in one hemisphere or one particular location of the brain. And then interestingly, when I was just kind of browsing around, there's a whole field of mathematical neuroscience, which is also called computational neuroscience, which is more about understanding how our brains behave by measuring it in mathematical ways, which I think is also all really interesting, because I was trying to find that sort of math to brain connection, and it turns out it's probably a little more complex than that. It's not like you can just localize it as, say, like, here's where mathematical reasoning happens, and here's the types of things you want to do to sort of cultivate your sort of neural development to become a better mathematical thinker. But it is interesting how even to solve the riddle of the brain, math is fundamental to that. And obviously, we've talked about the importance of STEM. In some ways, like, it does feel like the trope, to your point, Brandon, the trope that, like, teacher, why do we have to learn this, is in some ways being undermined by sort of the way work has changed, and the way folks who understand engineering and are, starting startups, they're frequently doing that based on some fundamental mathematical understanding, logical understanding, conditional logic, so that they can do the programming. So I think increasingly, particularly because nerds rule these days.
Sure do.
So since a lot of the folks who are really leading our economy these days come out of that background, maybe the relevance question is a little bit easier to answer.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that they're just, sort of baked in bad habits, though, that, whether it's our teacher or our just pop culture or whatever has, I think one of those remnants is that, girls are bad at math.
Right.
And so, I think that obviously I know that's not true. But I think we also need to do more to continue to work against those like lingering bad habits. I was watching, I don't know, Modern Family or some show that, when you have a 4-year-old, you watch while you're eating Dunkin' Donuts. It's a couple of plugs here.
Sure.
This episode is brought to you by.
Yeah.
But there was one of the young women characters was like, couldn't calculate a tip, couldn't calculate 10% of a $13 bill and said leave a 50. And so it's those like those little things, right? That while I think there are a lot of good examples of how quants are ruling the world, so to speak, there's also still plenty of things that are just baked into the pop culture that reinforce messages that are one, not true, and two, contrary to what we really need kids to believe. So we need to work extra hard, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right, because there's a little bit of othering and bullying that happens around like who's in and who's out. Like who knows quant. Like there are people who are quants, and then there's the great unwashed rest of the world.
It's funny. I think that real quants are maybe more likely to be unwashed.
That's a fair point. Yeah. But it is interesting, and that gets back to Dan's point about growth mindset too, where like hopefully our listeners, we haven't put any riddles or math problems into the show, or have we? But hopefully our listeners understand, really trying to come at this from a place of kindness and of inclusivity in terms of like casting a really wide net around who can engage in a mathematical quantitative understanding of things. Because I think frequently you're going to be surprised too. Like somebody might be surprised because they're way off, but also like the idea of bringing in different voices to a conversation and not excluding the people who don't know as much is something like we return to regularly on this show. And I think it's really important when it comes to math. Like don't other yourself by saying I can't do it, but also if you are sharp, a lot of the folks we know here at Kaplan, like a lot of us wound up here because we were good at math, but we didn't really think of it as something only we have access to.
Sure.
It's almost like you want to spread the gospel and get other people to understand how the world is a better place if you continue to work on your mathematical understanding.
I will admit at the top of the Pi Day article, they had a 2 trains are traveling nonstop question, and I glazed over and kept scrolling. I did not read through the entire thing, but there are 3 questions at the top of the article if you so choose, and they have the answers at the bottom of the article if you want to challenge yourself a little bit with some math here. We'll share that out, and we can do just that. We're coming up on time here. Brandon, any final thoughts? A topic that will be, I'm sure, coming back in 2019, math and the brain overall. Any final thoughts on this topic today?
I'm just, trying to put 2 and 2 together and figure out what I don't have anywhere I'm going with this. I like math. Math's great. I guess here's one thing that I will say. A thing that, again, back to my teaching days, the thing that I found that was really helpful was if you're facing a complex problem is not trying to solve it, but trying to do one thing. Like what's one thing? What's the first thing that you can do, and really break things down into its into a more bite-sized component. That's not like wow, this guy's got a really insightful comment, but I think sometimes when just your average layperson, not in an academic setting, is approaching a problem and they think it's too complex, there's probably something you can do. And typically that something is going to get you to another something, and it's going to get you another something. And even if you aren't able to work it out, the experience of doing some work, I think, will make you more confident and more competent over time.
Great content, as always, from Brandon and Mike. We'll be back with you again next week. We're rounding out 2018, looking forward to 2019, planning new episodes. So if there's something you want to hear about from Trending in Education, a specific topic maybe we haven't covered or something you want us to go more in depth on, feel free to reach out to us either at trendingineducation.com or at Trending in Ed on Facebook or on Twitter. Happy to take potential topics from the audience and really dive into something a little bit deeper as we go through. Find us on Twitter, find us on Facebook, head on over to iTunes, to Stitcher, to tune in, leave a rating, leave a comment. Love to read them here on the podcast, and also share us with a friend. Until next time, thanks so much for listening to Trending in Education.